Hello all and welcome back to question 3 of your AQA Language Walking Talking mock, looking at Rebecca. Firstly, before I start this video, I'd like to send a shout out thank you to Mrs. Crow, who very kindly brought me my visualiser, and make an early apology in the fact that my cat is stomping around, desperately wanting to be fed, even though she was only fed a couple of hours ago. Therefore, if she starts yowling through in the middle of the video, I have no idea what she's trying to teach us about question 3, but do listen in because you never know, she might have some interesting anecdotes to add into it all. Right, so we're going to get started with question 3. Now, question 3 I know is one that lots of people get really hung up on, I probably think is the best way of putting it. Students really worry with question 3 because they feel like it's completely different from things that they've done before, and it's not, okay, first and foremost. The way we've answered question 2 is exactly roughly how you're going to be answering question 3, and you're looking for the same kind of ideals. You're looking for a technique, you're looking to evidence that technique, and you're looking to explain and analyse to the examiner how and why it is an effective use of technique. So if we go back to the exam paper, which is here for you, make it nice and clear, question 3. Now, you remember last time we looked at this, which is a language analysis is a sentence or smaller. Therefore, your structural analysis must be anything bigger than a sentence. Oh, if I could spell analysis correctly, good start. Is anything bigger than a sentence. Okay, so it doesn't include a sentence, it's got to be bigger than a sentence. You might want to take 2 minutes now just to pause the video and come up with as many techniques and devices that you believe are structural features. Okay, now you've paused those. I've got an actual new sheet of paper to show you. And I'm just going to list some of them that I think that you might have come up with, and it's good to just sort of talk through what those might be before we send you away to go and answer the video. So if I stick that, you'll see my answer from question 1 there previously, and so if I move this up, wonderful. Okay, so some of the language devices that you might come across on a regular basis and terms and terminologies that are useful. So the first one is this one, focus. Okay, now focus, if we take it down to its etymological basis, so where the word comes from the word focal, which is a Latin word, and it means fireplace. Now, that may seem a little bit odd when we're looking at a language question, why is Miss Harvey talking about fireplaces? But if you think about it, in the olden days, and if you still have a house today that might still have a fireplace or has had a fireplace blocked off, it's normally the centre of the room. It's the place in the room that lots of people tend to look at. Nowadays, our focal point in a room actually is more likely the television. But often people place their television above their fireplace or in that kind of area, and then they face all their chairs towards it. So it's kind of like, what is everyone looking at? And your focus is exactly that. What is the writer wanting you to look at? So when we're talking about paragraphs, which of course is another structural feature, thinking about the focus of a paragraph helps us understand what it is that the writer's looking at. Because of course, when you change a paragraph, you're doing it only for 4 reasons. Your time has changed, your place has changed, your topic has changed, so what it's about, or your person has changed. So if any of those 4 things change, it's the focus changing, which is an important thing to try and remember when you're thinking about structure. Now, I keep using this word change. Perfectly fine word, okay, but if you really want to get the high marks in structure, talk of it as a shift. It's shifting. After all, it is a journey that you're going on when you're reading a book, okay, so it's not necessarily changing. That makes it very sort of staccato, so stop and start, and that's not what you're looking for here. You're looking for shifting. How is the writer weaving their way through to kind of give you that kind of that narrative that they're looking for? Okay, something else that potentially might help you with, and links onto the paragraphs actually, you've got paragraph length. That's a key indicator of structure. Okay, because it tells you how much the writer wants you to focus on something. If it's a very, very short paragraph and then it kind of suddenly changes into a really long one, why is that? You've got to question yourself. Why have they done that? Why is that paragraph shorter? Why is that paragraph longer? What happens when you have lots of very short paragraphs and lots of very long paragraphs? Some of you might be sat there thinking right now, oh, I remember Charles Dickens and his A Christmas Carol. Well, he uses lots of long paragraphs and that can be really annoying sometimes, which is true because that slows down the pace. Now, pace is another technique. This is the speed in which a narrative, so a story, progresses. So narrative comes from the Greek word for story. So whenever you see the word narrative, if you're unsure about what it means, if you just replace it with the word story, then sometimes that helps you unlock it slightly. So obviously, if you've got lots of very short paragraph lengths, in the same way that in language, in the language analysis, if you had lots of short sentences, it would have been possibly something very exciting happening. Okay, same with paragraph length, it picks up the pace. It moves through quite quickly. So often when you've got short paragraphs, you often also have this, you have dialogue, which is again another nice way of saying speech. Okay, you can say speech, but the proper terminology is dialogue. And obviously that picks up the pace because lots of things are told through you very quickly through dialogue, whereas often if you're using long prose and it's often quite descriptive, it needs a longer piece of writing, therefore the pace is slowed down. Now, we talked there about very short paragraph length, making something very exciting or potentially quite scary. Now, when you have something that builds, okay, within the writing to kind of build an emotion within the reader, that's called tension. Now, tension comes from another Latin word, okay, if I remember how to spell it. I think it's that way around. That might be the French, it might be ER for the Latin, so which I apologise. But the tender means to stretch. Okay, so that literally means to stretch. So when you think about your tension in your story, it's like the writer is stretching out the emotions of the reader. They're taking them like an elastic band and pulling and pulling and pulling and pulling until snap. It all goes back again. And that snap moment also has a name. That's called a climax. Okay, now a climax, again, it's got an etymological link to it. In Greek, okay, it means climax, which is spelled with a K in Greek, okay, means ladder. More specifically, the top of the ladder. Oh, I'm off the page slightly there. Means the top of the ladder. Okay, so obviously when you reach the top of the ladder, that's your climax point. It's where we get the word climb from. Okay, you can kind of see it there, and obviously you can definitely see it in the modern British way of spelling it. So to think of it as the point, the top of the climb. Okay, so you've got your tender to stretch, 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 stretch. Ping, your elastic band's gone. That's your climax at the top. That's your point, which is the main focus point for the entire piece of story, for the entire narrative, sorry. Okay, other things that you might have come across when thinking of structural features that you've written down. You might have, and let me move my piece of paper. Tell you what, if I rip it off and fold it in half, sorry, otherwise I'll budge the camera and then it will all go wrong. Other ones that you might have already. So you might have talked about first, second, and third person narrative voice. Okay, now obviously we've already talked about this word narrative. Narrative means story. So first, second, third person story voice. Sounds a bit silly when you say it like that, but it's important that you always add the narrative voice onto this bit because that's what you're talking about, the person who's telling the story. Now your first person narrative voice uses lots of I's and me and my. Okay, so you'd have I walked into a room, I looked around, I saw students working hard on Miss Harvey's YouTube video. Okay, that would be your first person. I'm going to jump straight to third person because that's the next most common narrative voice. There is a 50-50 chance that you'll get a first person or third person narrative voice extract in your exam. So third person is kind of the best way of describing it. I always think about the narrative as being told as if you've got a drone hovering over the characters as it happens. So there might be a particular character the drone tends to follow, but it doesn't mean that it can't see what other characters are doing. So there, if you have lots of he, she, they, lots of names of the characters. So if I said that same sentence again, instead of saying I walked into the room, I might say Miss Harvey walked into the room and she saw lots of students who were working hard on their on her YouTube video. Okay, so it's slightly different, so moving it into third person. Second person, I will tell you, I think it's extremely rare that you will come across it. I always tell my students that I'll eat my hat if it comes up in an exam. So I keep a hat just in case. But second person narrative voice is very rare. It's also particularly rare in the 19th century. Lots of writings weren't told in the second person voice. But that's the kind of you, our, we pronouns. Obviously, lots of these pronouns can move around within the narrative voice, but they tend to be the ones that are taking the forefront. Second person narrative voice, if I take that statement that I made earlier, would be you walked into the room. You saw students completing Miss Harvey's video or our video. So it's kind of, I always think about when I was a child, there used to be lots of little books in the library of the primary school where you'd go on like a treasure island hunt and you'd get to page 6 and you'd say, would you do this or would you do that? Turn to page 6 if you've chosen this, if you turn to page 14 if you've chosen this answer. And so and it would take you backwards and forwards through the book, and it's kind of you are the character, and that's quite rare. But that's your narrative voice. Okay, you also potentially want to think of a few other things that come up in structural features. You have setting. Okay, where is it set? Okay, the piece. What time does the time change throughout it? That's different from pace. Pace is how quickly the narrative moves on. Time is what time of day potentially. Does that change throughout the extract? Okay, you might want to think about tense. Is the extract written in the past, the present, or the future, and how does that affect how the reader feels about what's happening in that text? You might want to think about narrative structure. Now, narrative structure, there are 3 types. You have linear, you have non-linear, and you have cyclical. Okay, oh, and you can't see those, move those up. Hopefully, again, we will be able to do some etymology here. So, linear, you can see the word line in there, and that's quite simply, you have a start of a story, you have a middle of a story, you have an end of a story. That's your linear notice, okay? Linear narrative, sorry. Lots of your basic children's stories follow that line, okay? Cyclical, at the beginning, okay, that means circle. So that might mean that you have your start, then you have your middle, and somehow your start and your end up in the same place. So an example of that might be the start of the story. It starts with a criminal in a jail cell, and he says, let me tell you the story of how I got here. And then he tells the story going back in time, and then it brings you back again. And the entirety of the story is him back in time, but brings you back round again. Non-linear is quite simply anything that doesn't fit these two. Anything else, okay? Now, you're probably not going to use these too much, because you're only going to have an extract, but it's good just to have them in the back of your mind, okay? You might also more likely come across with this kind of narrative jumps, okay, as you have a flashback or a flash forward. Yeah, okay, and that's really important to think about there as well. I think I've got the majority of, well, I haven't, there are lots more structural features, but the majority that you possibly need to know on the forefront of your mind when looking at a text. So what I'm going to do now is I'm going to grab the text that we've been looking at and we're going to talk through how we might go ahead and answer that question. However, if you want to stop now and attempt the question without seeing how I might go about answering it, okay, if you go to your question 3, okay, you need to think about the whole source. This text is from the beginning of a novel. How has the writer structured the text to interest you as the reader? Think about what the writer focuses your attention on at the beginning of the source, how and why the writer changes this focus as the source develops, and any other structural features that might interest you. So they're really kind of drawing you into what the focus is here. So go away, pause the video now if you want to go ahead and write that answer before you see how I might attempt to answer it. Okay. So we've got that question. Something that I haven't actually managed to mention is I've noted up here that I've obviously said that it's 8 marks for question 2. It's actually also 8 marks for question 3. They are worth the same amount of marks. Okay, so you should be spending about 10 minutes on each question, and that 10 minutes should be a couple of paragraphs. Okay, so you've got to really refine this skill down. So we have our extract from Rebecca here, and obviously we're looking at the whole extract, the whole thing through. So yes, I've already got loads of annotations from question 2 on it, and that's not a problem, but you need to be looking the whole way down. So the first thing I'm going to do when I come to an extract is I'm going to go down and I'm going to mark the length of those paragraphs. So as I'm looking at the whole thing, I'm going to go with medium, small, medium, large, okay, and I'm just going to see if any particular paragraphs jump out at me. Okay, so the first one, I'm going to go, that's a short one. That's definitely a large one. Okay, that's a medium one. Let me go down a little bit. That's a medium one. That's a small one. That's a large one. And I can just keep going. And that one is a medium one. And that one is a small one again. So actually, we've got quite a pattern emerging here. Okay, we've got a very small at the beginning and the end, and then we've got this small one here in the middle. Now, why is that one small? Let me go down now and kind of subtitle each of the paragraphs. By subtitling them, I'm going to determine what their focuses are. Okay, so this first one, the focus is Rebecca. Rebecca's dream, I think. That's where we learn that Rebecca is in a dream. Okay, the next one is the driveway. The next picture, oh, would you look at that? It's actually still the driveway. Okay, it's a different part of the driveway, but it's still the driveway. And actually, to be fair, this first little bit up here is about the driveway slightly, Rebecca's dream and the driveway, because although she's not on the driveway, it's the gatehouse kind of dropping her off, locking her out from the driveway. The next one, on and on, now east, now west, the poor thread that had once been our drive. Look at that, we're still talking about the driveway. Who would have thought you could have such an interesting piece of writing, 4 paragraphs on a driveway? I dare you to try and do one about your own driveway. The next one, this really short paragraph, which stands out because it's so short. Interesting. That one is about Mandalay. So the house. Okay, this next long paragraph. Oh, it's about the garden. And the next one is kind of like a mixture between the garden again and the driveway, so I'm going to put garden. And then this very short one at the end again is about the house in Mandalay. Sorry, I haven't moved that down as I've gone. So you've got I've got Mandalay, is that very short one in the middle, garden large, medium one is also still about the garden, and that last one's about Mandalay. So if I was looking again at this, the 2 short ones that really stand out to me are this middle one here, okay, this small one, which is about the house, and the other one, the really small one at the end, which is also about the house. The rest of the extract is all either about the driveway or the garden. Now, that's interesting to me, because straight away the first line of this entire book, which I mentioned in my first video, is a very, very famous first line of a book, is "Last night I dreamt I went to Mandalay again." Okay, so she's dreamt she's gone to Mandalay. We want to find out, therefore, as the reader, all about Mandalay, and we don't get anything about Mandalay until paragraph 5. And when we do get something about Mandalay, which we've been building and building and building and building this tension for. So we've got that elastic band. The whole time that she's on this blinking driveway, that tension is growing and growing and growing and growing. and we're waiting for this big snap, the elastic band, to break, because she's pulling it as far as the writer, Maurier, is pulling it as far as she can, because we're like, okay, well, this is a really creepy driveway, you're talking about it for ages and ages and ages, the house has got to be really good. Because houses with big massive driveways are really interesting anyway. Clearly it's a big old house that has some real story to it. The fact that she's dreamt that she's been there before, which we'll talk about tense in a minute, okay, and the fact that it's the driveway itself is kind of this personified driveway that we'd already talked about in our language analysis. We know it's building to something, and when we get our snap of our elastic band, it's kind of like an anti-climax more than anything, because we get the smallest piece of information. That paragraph, okay, talks about Mandalay. Okay, there was Mandalay, our Mandalay, secretive and silent as it had always been, the grey stone shining in the moonlight of my dreams, the million windows reflected on the green lawns and the terraced. Time could not wreck the perfect symmetry of those walls, nor the site itself, a jewel in the hollow of a hand. The terrace sloped to the lawns, and then she just sort of turns around and walks off again. So if I was to draw this as the focus as I was going up, if I was a movie director and I wanted to make this an interesting scene, I would start with paragraph 1. We've got Rebecca by a set of gates, and this is where you'll see my wonderful A-level arts definitely coming through. So you've got your driveway, okay, and you've got Rebecca stood outside of it. Okay, there's Rebecca in her little dress outside. I'll put some little hair on her. Look at that. Okay, she's looking at the driveway. That's paragraph 1. Paragraph 2, she's made it to here, hasn't she? She started off the driveway. Okay, as she winds round, paragraph 3. Okay, that's the one about the drive kind of nearly getting to a ribbon now. So as it goes through, on and on, it winds left and right and left. Okay, east, now west. Okay, so the driveway is getting narrower and narrower, okay, and she's getting at different points along the driveway. So we've got paragraph 1, paragraph 2, paragraph 3, paragraph 4, and then paragraph 5, well, hey, we've made it to the house. Okay, which is probably a lot bigger than just 4 windows and a door, but needs must. Okay, so there's your Mandalay at the top of the road, at the top of the driveway. This is your paragraph 5. And you're like, finally, we're there. I want to learn all about that house. But no, Rebecca's going to take you off this way, down to the nice lawns, okay, into the garden. She's going to take you and away from the house. Okay, and you kind of get, again, a massive paragraph and then a medium paragraph, and she describes all the shrubs again that are there. So you kind of get the impression that she's not even looking at the house. Now, we've spent all this time going up the driveway to the house. To then not be at the house and learn about the house builds that tension further. So rather than snapping that elastic band, she let it go slightly, and then she pulls and pulls and pulls again. And you get this feeling with that very last paragraph, which again is about the house. Moonlight can play odd tricks upon the fancy, even upon a dreamer's fancy. As I stood there, hushed and stilled, I could swear that the house was not an empty shell, but lived and breathed as it lived before. So you kind of get the impression that in that very last paragraph she turns around to then look back at the house, but she doesn't go back in there. In this whole extract, she goes nowhere near the house. And that is very telling. Maybe ask yourself why. If the drive is super, super creepy and the writer is taking ages and ages to describe the driveway being so creepy, then you get to the house, and the house is clearly much creepier than the driveway because she won't go in it. And when she looks back, she talks about it kind of, again, personified like the drive, lived and breathed, and she could swear that it was, and all these kind of ideas. Clearly, something about that house is stopping her from going in. She doesn't want to go near it. Why? Why is what you should be asking yourself the entire time. So, firstly, we've got this real structure going through with this narrative, looking at focus shift from the driveway to the house and back straight away to the garden again, and then maybe a fleeting look back in focus shift back at the house, showing that Rebecca holds some sort of bad memories about this house, which we kind of touched upon in the language of the second question as well. Now, the next thing I want to draw to your attention is that the tense that this is told in. So the tense of this extract is past tense. She is retelling a story because she's already been there. Not only has she already been to Mandalay in her real life, she's dreaming it. Okay, and the dream is also in past tense. So she has been there and she's dreamed of going back there. Therefore, you as the reader are on the back foot. The character knows way more than you about both the house in its original state and the dream that she was in. She holds all the power to this extract. Therefore, you as the reader can only but follow her. You're not discovering it at the same time as her as if it was a present tense dream. And not only that, is that this character, Rebecca, has memories of Mandalay that you're still not parley to. You're still not unlocking. So there's this real kind of back foot on how you're looking at this extract through this character's eyes, which of course is well to note that it's a first person narrative. I do apologise, my cat is eating her biscuits below us incredibly noisily, so if you can hear that on the video, I do apologise. So you've got first person narrative voice. Okay, so you've got loads of structural features then again, which kind of again helps prove why this text is interesting. This text is interesting because as the reader, I'm given loads of information about where I am, but actually none of it is relevant to me. I want to know far more than is given to me here. Clearly, it's hinted at that something is not right. I want to know why, and I don't know the answer to that, and it's important that I, as the reader, I continue to read so that I can find that out. There is no dialogue in this extract, so we can't really talk about that. We've already kind of talked about the linear sense of it in the nature of the fact that we're following her on, so you could talk about the linear nature of it if you wanted to. We've got, you could almost call the dream a flashback, but it's not an official flashback, because a flashback within the structure of the text would be like one paragraph where she flashes back, whereas the entire extract is a flashback, therefore it's the past tense rather than a flashback. And we've talked about paragraph length and paragraph focus and the shift here. So we've got some really cool things that we could be writing about. So if I go back to my original piece of paper, where I have my answers. Oh, no, I filled that one out. So let's take away my awful drawing. Picasso can definitely keep the day job there. And then I'm going to look about how I might go about answering this question. So we've already talked about the things I want to talk about is the paragraph length, the focus shift, and then the past tense first person narrative. Voice. Okay, those are the three things even that I want to talk about in my answer. Pause the video now if you want to go ahead and try and answer those on your own without seeing me write up an answer. Okay, now this one doesn't necessarily follow a true Peeler or Pisa structure. Again, it's back to that. The what, how, why is the best way of doing this. So it's what, how, and why. Now, what a lot of students really struggle with in this question is using evidence. Evidence is actually quite difficult to try and show in this, because obviously sometimes to be able to talk about the entire paragraph shift, the evidence of that is really quite difficult to do because you can't quote it. But you don't need to quote it. When you're giving evidence and telling the examiner where you're taking your evidence from, you need to be specific to the text. So you must not say things like line 5 or in the second paragraph. You need to be more specific than that. In the first paragraph, when Rebecca talks about visiting Mandalay, okay, and you could put Mandalay in quotations because of course those aren't your words, that makes it specific evidence, okay? So if I'm talking about this paragraph length, I'm going to go straight away. So what is, obviously I've got to answer that point of that question. The writer makes the structure of this text Interesting. When they, how would I write it? When they, I suppose they ignore the house. What would be the better way of writing that? When they tease. Idea of Mandalay. Okay. In the very first line, Rebecca notes she's dreamt she went to Mandalay again. I keep spelling Mandalay wrong. I apologise. It's an E, not an A. Mandalay again. Here you've got your evidence. First line, Rebecca dreamt she went to Mandalay again. Okay. The writer makes the structure of this text interesting when they tease the idea of Mandalay. In the very first line, Rebecca notes she dreamt she went to Mandalay again. Therefore, the reader assumes the text will focus on Mandalay. Okay, so you've got your focus, which is your subject-specific terminology. So you've got your how, which is your evidence, and your subject-specific terminology there. Okay, so therefore the reader assumes that the text will focus on Mandalay. Interestingly, this is not the case. The writer follows the first paragraph with two large paragraphs that focus on the driveway. Sorry, three large paragraphs that focus on the driveway. Holding the reader in suspense as they build tension. Clearly, the house, to have such a long drive, is worth the wait. Yeah. When the tension does shift, so you've got more subject specific. In fact, I'm going to highlight it. Oh, and I realise, sorry, I'm writing off the page. So you've got tension, shift, focus. You had tension here again, large paragraphs, focus, okay, suspense. You've got lots and lots of subject-specific terminology sort of littered throughout this answer. So when the tension does shift to the house, the climax expected does not happen, does not occur. So again, you've got climax, another bit of subject-specific terminology here. So when the tension does shift to the house, the climax does not appear. For the paragraph focused on the house, is the smallest. Oh, it's not the smallest, is it? It's one of. Be careful what I reference there. Is one of the smallest. In the extract. This is interesting as it makes the reader question. Now, just stopping there quickly, I could, if I wanted to, be talking about here, it makes the reader want to read on. Now, you're not wrong, but I can tell you as an examiner and as a teacher, I hate that phrase. Bang my head against a brick wall, because you'll see what I'm going to write actually explains and analyses what the writer's trying to do here far better. This is interesting as it makes the reader question why the character of Rebecca is avoiding the house. Yeah. Why is the character of Rebecca avoiding the house? That's where you want to read on. You're not reading on because you want to read on. You're reading on because you want to find out why Rebecca is avoiding the house. That, although I put it in 2 paragraphs, actually probably would be 1 paragraph. And if I go back through at the end, look, the climax, the paragraph focused on the house is one of the smallest in the extract. This is interesting because it makes the reader question why the character is avoiding the house. Okay, so you've got your what, your why actually tends to come a little bit more down here, doesn't it? The how, the focus on Spence, long drive over. But this is kind of the why down here, isn't it? Now you could go again, so there I've talked about at the top, remember I said I had paragraph length and focus shift, that's what I've done in this paragraph. You could do another paragraph about the past tense and the first person narrative voice if you wanted to now, okay, or you could go away, pause the video and see if you can rewrite my paragraph to explain the kind of structural shift again yourself. Hopefully that made lots of sense to you. If it didn't, there'll be more videos, and if not, you can always email me. I also appreciate that some of you, sorry, my battery's about to die, appreciate some of you are emailing through your work, so thank you so much for that, I really appreciate it. See you next video, bye!